Our next speaker is an author, a speaker himself, obviously, a designer, as well as being an Agilist. He is one of the leading voices on the topics of Agile UX and Lean UX. Please, would you welcome from Barcelona, Jeff Gothelf. Jeff.
Hey folks, hope you're doing well today. Nice to be here. Kind of a last minute addition. Happy to be here as a special guest today. Excited to have this conversation with you, and apologies for the delays getting started. Um, Zoom is behaving strangely, which is not the first time it's happened this week for me, with Zoom just kind of acting very oddly. In any case, I'm super excited to be here today. I'm going to share with you a talk about that is largely centered around my new book called Forever Employable, and it focuses fairly explicitly on treating our product, our career, like a product or a service with an agile mind frame. So let me share my screen with you. Hopefully you can see that. Who knows what Zoom will do today, but nevertheless, there it is. And really the story behind this book, which is an interesting book, you'd be like, Jeff, why are you writing a book about being employable, right? You're kind of a UX guy, you're talking about Agile, product management, design thinking. And it's interesting because the story starts on the morning of my 35th birthday. I woke up on my 35th birthday, it was January 31st, 2008, in a cold sweat. I was actually fairly worried about the future, but I couldn't figure out why, because up until that point in my life, things have been pretty good. This is me at 35. These are what my kids look like today. They're teenage girls running around Barcelona. I was married, still married, had a house outside of New York City in the US, well-paying job. Everything was going pretty well. I couldn't figure out why I was freaking out on the morning of my 35th birthday. And I had a pretty good run getting there. I started off as a broke musician in the early 90s, played with bands, toured around the US for a while, tried to be a rock star. Didn't work out so much, got tired of being broke. And so the internet came around and saved the day for me. In 1999, if you could spell HTML, you could get a job, and I could do a little bit more than spell it. And so I got my first job in 1999 as a web designer. And I did some graphic design, did some HTML. And shortly thereafter, I got to reading this book. This book is now in its fourth edition, but back then it was in its first edition. It's called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web by Peter Morville and Lou Rosenfeld. And this book really changed my life because it helped me get a sense that I really wanted to be further up the waterfall than I currently was as a web designer. As a web designer, I was at the end of the waterfall. As an information architect, I could actually move further upstream and start to help make more decisions. And for me, that was very interesting, especially since we were indeed working in a waterfall world. And so I head down this particular path, and the dot-com bubble explodes. Which stinks. So I bounce around for a while looking for work. I end up working at America Online for a few years, designing the software that won these CDs, bounce to the West Coast of the United States. And then 10 years later, I land on the East Coast, back in the East Coast, back in New York City at the Ladders as the director of user experience. And, at that point, 10 years into my career, 35 years old, I'd clawed my way up to middle management. And what I recognized at that point for me was that the reason why I was having this panic attack on the morning of my 35th birthday is because in 5 years, I would be 40. And from that side of 40, 40 feels old. From this side of 40, 40 feels fine. Like I'm very happy to be 40 again. But as I was going to be 40, I was going to be more expensive, more difficult to employ. There are fewer and fewer jobs as you go up the corporate ladder. That's by design. And most importantly, I was hiring all of these younger designers onto my UX team at the Ladders, and they were smarter, better, faster, and most importantly, cheaper than me. And so I felt like they were coming for my job, and I was terrified that I wasn't going to be able to compete with these folks very, very soon, like within the next 5 years. And so on the morning of my 35th birthday, I made a resolution. I resolved on that particular morning to stop looking for work. I wasn't going to play this game anymore, right? If you think about it, it kind of with a systems thinking approach, Job hunting is a push model, right? You're continuously pushing yourself out into the marketplace, your resume, your LinkedIn profile, you're applying for work, right? Those types of things. You're pushing yourself out there. I wasn't going to play that game anymore. I was going to turn that on its head, 180 degrees, and create a pull system. I was going to figure out how to create a situation where jobs were looking for me. And that was the path that I decided to head down when I turned 35 years old. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, Jeff, wow, that's absolutely mind-blowing. Those are amazing. That's an amazing resolution, which is really great. But it brings up some really interesting questions, right? And the questions I immediately set out to solve. First and foremost, does anyone know who I am? Right? If jobs are going to come looking for me, people should know me. Does anyone know me? That's a fair question. And certainly in 2008, it was a very fair question. Why would they look for me? If people are going to come after me, come looking at jobs, opportunities, whatever it is, why would they look for me? What do I help them solve, right? What is the value that I bring that they would seek me out? How would they find me? In 2008, we've got LinkedIn, we've got Google, but where do I want to live online so that people find me all the time? And then lastly, if I'm successful with this, what kind of work do I ultimately want? Right? If I'm attracting these opportunities to myself, I want jobs that I actually want to do. And that's these are the questions that I actually set out to solve. And so what I recognized is that the way that I can solve this is by creating a platform and using that platform as a magnet to continuously pull in opportunities. And for me, the recipe for a platform is this. It's my expertise and my experience, my content, talking about that expertise and that experience, and an audience. And if you can build a platform on top of that, in theory, you can start attracting opportunities towards you. And so that's what I set out to do. I've spent the last 12 years building that platform. And in that time frame, I've recognized that there were at least 5 qualities that I needed to find in myself in order to become forever employable, to create this reality. And the way that I did it was I created 5 steps. I used 5 specific steps to build that platform and to do it today. And the bottom line is that you have to treat yourself, you have to treat yourself and your product development as a product. Forgive me, the cat is in my lap. I'm working from home. I didn't think he would be so interested in sitting in my lap while I gave a presentation. The bottom line is this: you have to treat your career and your professional development as a product. And if you think about the way that we ship products today in that continuous way, seeking outcomes, continuously learning, continuously improving, it surprises me to no end that most folks don't think about their careers this way. And that's exactly what we set out to do. So let's talk about the 5 qualities and the 5 steps, and we'll go through each one of those, and then we can do a quick Q&A. These are the 5 qualities that I discovered in myself that I needed to build this platform and to create this thought leadership platform. Now, entrepreneurialism, self-confidence, continuous learning, improvement, and reinvention. Those should sound very familiar to this audience because those are the qualities of agility, right? These are the qualities that we seek in the teams that we work with, in the companies that we work with, on the products and services that we help build. We're looking for these qualities in the way that the product is built. It's the same thing here, except the application is not a digital product or service. It's you, your professional growth, your career development, etc. And it took me a while to figure out that I had these qualities. I had to dig deep because entrepreneurialism, for example, is not something I ever thought I had. For me, entrepreneurialism was somebody else. I was never the ideas guy. I was the execution guy. And yet, as I started to dig and look for inspiration in my life that would help me be entrepreneurial and build this platform, well, I told you I used to play in bands. And bands, as if you've been in a band, you know for a fact, bands are startups. You and your friends get together and you have a crazy idea, and your job is to try to convince the world to come along with you. Well, I did this for a lot of years with a couple of different bands, and I helped run those bands as a business. Calling them a business is a bit of an exaggeration at times, but I helped run them. So I had this entrepreneurial experience. I just didn't see it because it wasn't a digital product or service, right? Self-confidence is something that you get by being on stage in bands, but I was looking for experiences in my life that would drive me to try to succeed in a new and a more compelling way. One of the things that taught me self-confidence in my life is the time I spent in the circus. I spent 6 months on the road with a circus in the United States in the summer of 1995. It was a weird place, and I stuck out in that place. I didn't fit in particularly well, and I wasn't particularly successful. But my goal was to figure out how to succeed in this new world and how to overcome these, these social differences, this understanding a new culture, et cetera. And ultimately, after 6 months, I arguably had become very successful there, and really learned that I could overcome any situation. Because honestly, if you can get along well with the folks in the circus, get along well pretty much anywhere in the world. Continuous learning, obviously, an Agile quality. And one of the things that comes from reading and engaging in conversation and keeping up to date, both on social media and on reading platforms, and books and blogs and videos and conferences, the kind of stuff that we're doing here today. This is how we get better. And this is something that I've always done to improve the craft over time. And then you take those learnings and you improve those learning. You improve yourself based on those learnings, and you continuously try to make your service better. What you offer, how you do your job, what you do. And that's what I do. This is a photo from the last live in-person workshop I taught. This was 7 months ago in Paris, and I was co-teaching with Jeff Patton. Now I co-teach all the time, especially with Jeff Patton, because I learn a ton from him. I learn how to tell better stories. I learn how to teach more effectively. I learn how to blend his ideas and my ideas and how to collaborate. And it's those kinds of collaborations and that drive to continuously improve how I teach and how I present and how I write that makes the platform more and more successful over time, and it doesn't stagnate. Ultimately, there's reinvention. And reinvention is interesting because the things that got you here are not going to get you there. And so the question that I teach the teams that I work with and that I write about in Forever Employable is, how do you take your core value, the thing that you're particularly good at, and continuously reinvent it as the times change, as technology changes, as the world's reality changes? One of the things that I've done regularly is I've taken the content that I've been teaching and I've applied it to new environments and new contexts and new disciplines. So for example, I do a lot of talking about design thinking and product thinking, lean startup, product management, UX, et cetera. And I've applied that work to those types of teams, but it turns out that there's a tremendous benefit in those ideas for non-product teams like human resources and finance and legal, et cetera. And so you've got a tremendous opportunity to take what you've done and try to find new places to deliver that value. And in this particular case, HR teams need this, right? Finance teams need this, and it's redefining how they do their actual job. And so those were the 5 qualities. Now, as we think about the 5 steps that I took to becoming Forever Employable, I'm going to tell you my story. Now, my story comes from me and my background, the privileges that I have, and right the family and et cetera that I've had. So pick and choose the steps that work for you. But generally speaking, this is the process that I followed to help build this platform. I talk about planting a flag, telling your story, following the new path, teaching, and then giving it all away. Now, we'll start with planting your flag. Planting your flag is deciding where you're going to be an expert. And it's a balancing exercise, right? Because you can't say Agile, right? Agile's huge. What slice of Agile? You could say Agile coaching. Well, Agile coaching is still pretty big. You could say Agile coaching for healthcare teams. Now that becomes really interesting, right? Because now you've carved a niche that's big enough to support your platform, right? But specific enough so that people can say, Jeff, he's the Agile coach for healthcare teams. Right, so we're looking to decide where to plant your flag and then build your platform around that. And the people who have done this well, you know their flags just by looking at their names, right? Eric Ries is the lean startup guy. Jake Knapp is the sprint guy. Alex Osterwalder, business model generation, business model canvas. There's an American comedian named Sarah Cooper who's planted her flag as basically a Trump lip sync impersonator, right? And for me, the flag that I planted was lean UX, right? Because that's what I knew. That's the work that I was doing. I was bringing user experience and design, user experience and Agile together. And that's what I was going to talk about. That's what I was going to write my book about. And that was an obvious place for me to plant my flag and to start to build the platform on top of that. Now, the first question that comes to mind once you say, okay, Jeff, I want to plant my flag, how do I figure out where to do it? Is a fair question. And there's a few exercises and questions that I have in the book for you. But what happened is after I published the book 3 months ago, people started reading it and they told me, they said, listen, that concept that you have in there about how to find your flag, it's eerily similar to this Japanese concept called ikigai. Now, I'd never heard of this before I wrote the book, and I'm kind of regretting it. I go back and do maybe a second edition and add this in there. But I touch on this sort of in a non-specific way in the book. Ikigai really brings this together, is a really nice exercise for helping you figure out where to start to experiment, to test and learn flags to plant. So Ikigai basically forces you to answer 4 questions. The 4 questions are, what do you love? What are you good at? Because what you love and what you're good at aren't necessarily the same things. What does the world need right now? What are the technological trends, geopolitical trends, sociological trends, etc.? And what can you be paid for? And you can run this exercise independently, but the goal is to start to come up with things that tick all 4 boxes. If something starts to tick all 4 boxes, that's your reason for being, right? That's the reason you get up in the morning every day, according to the Ikigai formula. It's also a great place to plant your flag. And it's a really interesting conversation to have because it doesn't necessarily just have to be professional stuff. It can be personal stuff as well. One of the things I considered planting my flag about was vintage electric pianos. I happen to have a lot of knowledge about vintage electric pianos, but the community is kind of small for that. The world doesn't really need it as much as other things. And I might have been able to get paid for it, but not a lot. And so this is a really great way to start to determine some hypotheses about where you might want to plant your flag. And if you get more than one idea there in the center, we start to run experiments to see if indeed we can start to develop an audience around that idea. And the goal is to test and learn until you figure out exactly where your audience is and what the best way is to reach them about your idea. Now, the way that you run these experiments is by starting step number 2, which is telling your story. Telling your story is all about figuring out the best format, channel, distribution method, network to get in front of an audience and to be able to share your expertise and your learning. And your goal, but people always get stuck. They'll say, okay, Jeff, I picked a flag, but what unique story do I have? People get stuck in their heads and they'll say, look, I don't have anything compelling to talk about. Everything's already been written. I haven't done anything remarkable. I haven't sold a startup or worked with celebrities or run an ultra marathon. But here's the interesting thing. The one thing that you have that nobody else has is your story. Only you've made the same set of decisions and overcome the set of obstacles to get you to where you are today. No one else has done that. No one else can tell that story. And that's a great place for you to start. So as you plant your flag, you can start to tell the story that you know about your experience. Here's what I did. Here's what worked for me. And that is the best kind of story that you can tell because it's authentic and it's personal. And that starts to build that connection with folks. And the goal is to figure out the right combination of channel and format. Are these LinkedIn posts? Are they tweets? Are they videos? Is it a podcast? Are they infographics, right? Are they presentation decks, right? Are they talks? Who knows, right? But the idea is to figure out how to tell your story in a most compelling way. I started telling my story for the first time on August 12th, 2010 at the big Agile conference somewhere in the United States. I can't remember where it was. This was the first talk I gave on it. This was 2.5 years after my 35th birthday. It was called Beyond Staggered Sprints. It was before the idea of Lean UX. A month later, I gave the first talk about Lean UX in Paris. There was a conference there. It was the first time I said the words Lean UX on stage. And that was, again, 2.5 years after my 35th birthday. This stuff takes time. I got my big break on March 7th, 2011, when Smashing Magazine published this article. And it was not about my stupid cat who won't stay out of my life during this. It's called Lean UX, Getting Out of the Deliverables Business. And this was a big deal because at the time, Smashing had 1 million readers. And so all of a sudden, I'm having a conversation about Lean UX to 1 million people, right? And this is 3 years after my 35th birthday. And all of a sudden, that changes what I'm doing. People are asking me to come give talks. I'm giving talks about Lean UX. And I'm telling my story anywhere and everywhere that I can to test and learn which one resonates the best, which one builds the biggest audience, and which one starts to generate inbound opportunities towards me. So I'm tweeting, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Quora, Medium, MailChimp, etc. The only thing we stopped short of doing was Lean UX the musical. Honestly, I would have told that story too if people wanted to hear it. Decided not to do that one. And in hindsight, trying to figure out why the Lean UX story resonated, this is what I've gathered from it. So first of all, right, as you're telling your story, right, these are the tips that make the story stick. I solved a real problem that many people had. So I was solving a real problem for a real customer, just like your product or service does. I had actual real world experience solving that problem. So I was speaking from a place of practice, a place of experience, rather than a theoretical place. I can say we did this and it worked, or it did not work. And we did exactly that. We shared our wins and we shared our losses. Not everything we did was awesome. A lot of the stuff that we did failed miserably. And so I talked about that. I talked about what we learned from that and how we iterated into the next version of the process and the next version of the process. I provided tactical, practical advice, just like I'm doing right now, because I want you to take something away from every interaction with me that you can try at work the next day. And that's a big part of the platform that I was building. And that's what helped to build that authentic connection as I was storytelling. Now, we've planted our flag. We've told our story, we're telling our story, these new paths open up. And so our job, the next step in the process, was to follow these new paths. And this is where it gets scary, because this is where you have to leave some of the old stuff that you were doing and start to move on to some potentially new opportunities and places where you have not necessarily worked before. Now, for me, I was doing less and less design work. And remember, this is already terrifying me because I'm afraid my skills are going to atrophy as these new designers are coming into the market. And now, instead of doing design work, I'm flying around the world and I'm teaching workshops and I'm speaking at conferences. And this is basically what I'm doing right now is I'm teaching Lean UX around the world. I'm telling my story. But it turns out that new opportunities come from this. New paths start to open up. As you start to tell your story, the audience grows, the platform starts to generate inbound opportunities. It turns out that book publishers go to conferences and they look for the latest ideas and the latest speakers on an idea. And I got offered a book deal to write the Lean UX book at a conference. I never saw that coming. And I said, sure, I'll write the book. I just didn't tell the publisher the very important thing that I didn't know how to write a book. I should have. Had I told them, I don't know if they would have still given me the contract. But for me, I wanted to jump into it with both feet, because this is exactly why I started to build the platform, was to get these opportunities to come in for me. Now you'll say, Jeff, you're lucky. And I'll say, you're right. But I believe that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. All right, I'm going to get him out of here because there's no way I can finish this. You gotta go. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. I had no idea. I think he was sleeping here. I thought he'd be fine for another 45 minutes. All he does is sleep. Anyway, I love this quote because yes, I was lucky, but I was lucky because I was ready to be lucky. I was ready for these new opportunities, for these new paths to open up, and I was ready to give them a shot. Now, this is risky. It takes time away. It starts to threaten my day job, but I'm looking to create a safety net that gives me lots of other options other than just my day job. And so I set off to write the book, and sure enough, I was awful at it. It took me 2 years. I burned through 3 editors, wrote the manuscript 4 times to get to a final state of the first draft of Lean UX. Frankly, the only reason it even got there in the first place was because Josh Seiden joined the project, and without him, I would never have brought it over the finish line. On March 11th, 2013, Lean UX was published for the first time. It's 5 years after my 35th birthday. I'm now 40. I'm now old. First book gets published, right? And the book really changes everything. But it took 5 years of persistent storytelling about this flag to get this path to open up. And the book really opened up the new path, and it got me to step forward. Now, if you would have asked me 15 years ago, Jeff, what are you doing? What would you be doing in 15 years? I never would have said teaching. Teaching felt like something I just wasn't in my, I wasn't good at it. Didn't seem like a career. But everything I do today is about teaching, and it's about learning how to convey my experience more effectively, learning how to tell my stories more effectively, and getting better at the craft, right? So this continuous improvement that we talked about before, through teaching and through coaching, I have to explain the craft. And if you can explain it to people and they do a good job, you get better at the craft. And I do that workshops and conferences, webinars and podcasts and articles, etc. And look, I'm a self-employed consultant. I've got time to do that. But if you work in-house, you've got lots of opportunities to do this as well. There's no shortage of opportunities for you to start to tell your story, to share your expertise, and to teach inside these organizations. And it's that teaching that tells you where your content is resonating, where there are gaps in your content, where you have an opportunity to go learn something else, right? And how to best convey this information to an audience so that you can continue to grow that audience and that platform. Now, the fifth and final step is the one that took me the longest to learn, the one that I still struggle with a little bit, and it's step 5, and it's give it all away. Now, giving it all away feels unintuitive. At the very least, it feels unintuitive. You've been working professionally for a long time. You should be paid for your experience. You should be paid for your expertise. And I believe that too about myself. And yet, the unintuitive thing that happens here is that the more that you can give stuff away, the more that you can take the stories, the hard-earned stories that you have from your experience and give them away in a public place, the more opportunities come to you. The more you can give back to your community, the more that you can give back to the discipline, to the domain, to the conversation, to the canon of work, the more opportunities end up coming your way. To do that, you have to make your work and yourself findable and accessible. Now, look, if you don't have a following, maybe going on to kind of social media or public blogging sites is a great place to start, like Medium or LinkedIn and so forth. But in those situations, the audience that you're building is you're renting that audience. You don't own that audience. LinkedIn or Medium or Twitter owns that audience, right? Or YouTube or whatever it is. Eventually, you want to bring everything in-house. I bring everything in-house under my own website, jeffgothelf.com, and everything's there. And almost everything there is free, right? The videos of the talks are free. The resources and the templates are free. The blogs are free. The links to the podcasts and so forth, all the articles, all the content is free. The only thing I charge for is the books and the online courses that I teach. And that's it. So everything is there. I'm easily findable. I'm easily accessible, and it's there for free. And the more that you give back, the more that you can build your community locally. I can't stress that enough. Like, we all aspire to speak on like the big Agile conference stage or the Mind the Product stage or something like that. But speaking locally starts to build your audience locally. You start to practice your experience. Meetups are a terrific way to start to practice telling your story, try and practice teaching, build a short workshop, see how it is. And your local community organizers are going to be super grateful for that. They're going to be grateful for your presence. Maybe you're going to help organize as well. Again, you start to build that personal brand, that thought leadership, and you start to generate opportunities toward you. Now, to wrap this up, a few things to remember. This is my path. Okay. And so staying relevant in that path has meant staying active. This is not a passive thing you can do. This is an active process that you need to continuously do. You've got to maintain that network. You've got to grow it. You've got to nurture it with new ideas and new content and new discussion. That means you have a presence in the conversation, both the conversation that you're having and the conversation that others are having. If you're looking to shift directions, let's say you're in engineering now and you want to become an Agile coach, or you're an Agile coach and you want to move into product management, give yourself time to move the platform and the network with you, the audience with you. Give yourself at least 2 years. 18 months ago, I decided that I wanted to start talking to human resources. I don't have any credentials in human resources, but I started engaging in them in conversation. I started injecting myself into threads and participating in conversation and maybe generating some content around there. And now 18 months later, 20 months later, I'm now starting to see some traction from that, getting invited to have more and more discussions in the HR community and so forth. So give yourself at least a couple of years to do that. Finally, this is my path. It worked for me because of who I am, the privileges I was born into, the opportunities that I've had, and the obstacles I've had to overcome. Your path may be different. There are lots of other ways to get there. So pick and choose the pieces that make sense for you and start to build this reality that helps you create the safety net. It's basically career insurance, right? You're continuously improving your presence in the domain and in the industry so that the next opportunity continues to find you. And the closing thought I have for you is this quote from Bezos. Bezos thinks long-term. People always ask him, they'll say, well, what's going to change in the next 5 years? And he says, look, that's not how I think about my business. He said, I think about my business about what's not going to change in the next 10 to 20 years. And then I figure out how to deliver on that consistently as the delivery channels change, right? So people are always going to need food. They're always going to need entertainment. They're always going to need books, right? How we deliver that is going to change over time, but the core need stays the same. And as you think about where to plant your flag and where to build your platform and how to deliver it, try to boil down what you do to your core value. Right? If I asked you what you do today, you'd probably give me a job title: Agile coach, product manager, developer, whatever it is, right? But if I asked you kind of what is the core value that you bring, you start to really think about what it is that you offer, the service or the product that you ultimately want to optimize. And it's things like, well, I help small teams scale up. I make complicated things simple. I coach teams in new ways of working, right? Those are things that are sort of forever viable, and then allow you to then change how you deliver them over time, allowing you to become forever employable. And that's ultimately the goal with all of this. And so with that, I want to say thank you very much. First of all, thanks for listening, and thanks for having me as kind of a surprise guest here today. The book's out. I'd love for you to get a copy at Amazon or foreveremployable.com. If you have any questions at all, just let me know. And I'd love to chat with you now about anything and everything that you'd like to talk about.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Now, we still have some time, so folks, if you want to ask Jeff some questions, please put them in the chat now. Get your fingers rocking.
Love that cat's energy. He's old too.
I think it's because you're talking and the cat gets jealous that he or she wants to be part of whoever you're talking to. It's just us.
I think so. He's an old man too, you know. The fact that he does have all that energy is good. It's good to see. Good to see.
One question, that's an observation from Stephen. A lean UX musical sounds great. Any chance of one in the future?
It's so funny. I was we years ago, I can't remember, it was like 4 or 5 years ago, we were on stage. Josh Stein and I were on stage at UX Cambridge, one of Mark Dalgarno's conferences in Cambridge, and on the stage there was a piano. I played, I play piano, and we sat there and we started getting like happy songs about designing stuff, and then like it would get all minor and dark around like, oh, deliverables, deliverable deadline, dun dun dun. Right? I don't think so, not anytime soon.
Never say never. Any questions coming in? Anybody? Give folks a minute or two, Jeff.
Sure. There's a raised hand.
Oh, I've missed the hand. Who's raised their hand? Who's got a raised hand? Colin. I've unmuted you.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. I didn't mean to come on specifically to talk. I was going to type, but I'm happy to talk anyway. Just a quick question, I guess, for Jeff. How radical a change do you think you could make in your new path?
Well, I think it depends on your appetite for risk, right? So if you look at my story, I went from sort of doing the work full-time inside an organization to launching a consulting company that offered that way of working as a service. And so that was the first kind of step out. And then within that services organization, I built the education business, the content in the education business. And then I took that out as a self-employed individual once we sold that consulting company. So the shifts that I made were big for me, going sort of full-time employment to entrepreneur to self-employed, but the content was pretty much the same. Kind of the format of the employment changed, but the content was relatively speaking the same across all of those workplaces. I think if you're looking to make us kind of a sharp left turn, you want to go from I don't know, from Agile coach to pastry chef, right? For example. right? I think, look, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like if your true passion and like you do the Ikigai exercise and, you know, the thing that ticks all 4 boxes is pastry chef. I mean, look, you love it, you're good at it. The world definitely needs it and you can get paid for it, right? Then you have to figure out how to kind of shift the mix, right? So assuming that today you're 100% agile coach and 0% pastry chef when it comes to revenue, right? You've got to figure out how to start to shift that mix. And the key takeaway here is that as that mix starts to shift, you're dedicating less time to your core profession, right? The thing that you're doing right now. And if you are, and that's risky and it's scary, right? Because you're basically going to reduce the level of effort and attention that you're paying to that. And so you're either going to make less money at it, or you're going to put your full-time employment at potential risk after a little while, right? You're sort of trading off, maybe you go to half-time, that type of thing. But
Sure.
that's the idea is you don't want to go like this, right? You don't want to just shift, like take a sharp 90-degree left turn and say, okay, I'm done being an agile coach. Today I make the pastries, right? Like that's not, ultimately I think you want to make that shift gradual. And what you're doing, like think about this from a lean startup perspective, right? What you're doing is you're building evidence that pastry chef is viable, right? So you're running experiments about which pastries to make, how to sell them, who to sell them to, how much to charge for them, right? When to sell them, is it a cyclical, seasonal business, that type of thing. And as you gain evidence and you get better at pastry chef, right, you can start to kind of increase the level of investment you have in it. So again, it's very much like taking the same principles that come out of agile and lean startup and design thinking. You have a hypothesis that you want to become a pastry chef. And I don't know that about you, Colin, but who wouldn't want to be a pastry chef, really?
Sure.
Sure, right. And you want to build evidence for that hypothesis, right? And the way that you build evidence is you run experiments. And the more evidence you get, right, the heavier the experiment can get. And eventually you get to a point where the experiment is the business and now you're sort of winding down the other thing. So the transition, like the severity of the change or the radicalness of the change, I think can be as radical as you want it to be. I just wouldn't, cut the wheel left while you're doing, 100 miles an hour down the highway. I would slow down and make that turn.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for that. That was really helpful insight.
Jeff,
I'm
we
looking
have
forward to
another
your
question.
pastry, Colin.
Sorry, we have another question. An anonymous attendee says, did you move to Barcelona for a specific opportunity or just for a change of scene?
I moved here. I'm going to sound like a broken record. I moved here after having a hypothesis with my wife that we wanted to live abroad. We wanted to move away from the United States and take our kids and go live abroad somewhere. But we didn't know where. We had hypotheses about a few cities in the world, and we ran experiments. We lived in each city for a month. During the summer with the kids, we would rent an Airbnb. So we lived inside a neighborhood. It was under ideal circumstances. Summertime, no school, very little work. And in theory, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, as good as the weather's going to get in that part of the world. And we ran that experiment. We did a month a year for 4 years. We ended up visiting 5 cities, living in 5 different cities. So I got something in my eye. In 5 different cities, and Barcelona was the winner. And it kind of ticked all our boxes, and we really loved it here. And that was 3 years ago.
Thanks, Jeff. Hopefully that's answered the question for whoever asked that. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands up. Just checking. No other hands up. I'll give you guys another minute or so. And then we'll let Jeff get back to presumably the sunshine in Barcelona today, is it?
Actually, it's raining today. My daughter was very disappointed. She had a school field trip. We have in-person school still, which is a miracle. And they had a field trip today and it got canceled because it actually is raining today for the first time in a while. So
I'd like to say actually in Edinburgh, you can see the sunlight on the side of my face. It's actually quite sunny in East
that's
Scotland.
Amazing. That's amazing when it's like that, when it's upside down, when Europe is upside down.
Well, I don't see any more questions coming in. So Jeff, I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of the whole of Agile Scotland and the attendees to thank you very much.